Most of you have, but some of you haven't. We are a think tank and a discussion platform that opposes the Russian regime and tries to work to resolve the situation that is happening now and to change it for better. We are funded entirely by you, so please, if you don't mind, donate. There is QR codes over there in the main room, and today we have a wonderful speaker, Vladislav Inozemtsev, and our topic is can Putin's economic model survive permanent war from petrostate dependency to war economy? Can the system sustain prolonged conflict? And Vladislav, he is a Russian economist and a political scientist focused on global economic trends, the knowledge economy, and Russia's development. He founded the Center for Post-Industrial Studies in Moscow in '96 and has had fellowships at institutions like Johns Hopkins Center for Strategic and International Studies and the German Council of Foreign Relations. He advised the Russian Government Modernization Committee under President Dmitry Medvedev, and then left Russia in 2014 after the first Russian aggression against Ukraine, and now he's based in DC. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Analysis for Strategies in Europe and a special advisor at the Middle East Media Research Institute, and has authored more than 20 books. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, and please. It's on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. This is my, I think, second appearance during the last year. And the question which was posed is actually one of the most important issues these days about whether Russia can afford to wage this aggressive war against Ukraine for another number of years. Because I would say when Putin promised to take Kyiv in 3 days in 2022, very few people could imagine that actually this war will be almost as long as the Second World War, even longer than what the Russians call the Great Patriotic War, the war between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Russia. So, but now we are in the fifth year of the war, and there are no credible evidence suggesting that it will end in coming several months. Most probable, it will expand even to 2027, as the European leaders now presume in their strategies. So I would focus entirely on the Russian economy. I think there would be a lot of questions expanding the focus. But anyway, from the beginning of the war, I think I was one of few experts who reiterated two major points which have been very obvious for me. The first one was that the first time I stated it was April 2022, that actually the Russian economy can provide Putin with a lot of money and resources to wage the war for almost indefinitely long time. I was unaware about how much the war would expand, but anyway, my point was that the Western sanctions will be unable to change Putin's mind and to stop the war. The second point was added by autumn of 2022, when I saw this, what was called partial mobilization, and its effects on the Russian economy, on the Russian people, on the Russian workforce. And since that time on, I reiterated many times that I cannot believe in another wave of forced mobilization. And since that time, for around 4 years so far, we haven't seen another wave. And even yesterday, I think, the International Institute for Strategic Studies published another big report suggesting that it would happen, or it definitely will happen in September. I would once again be very cautious about this, because for Putin to announce a new mobilization is too risky politically. And now it's more risky than ever before. So this is 2 points which I would like to start with, or just to repeat them. And talking about the economy, I would like to say the following. We should distinguish between several things. First of all, what is the Russian economy's role for the military? It's a source of money. And Putin, for years, he believed and he treated the Russian economy as a mere source of money, of budget funds, which fuel his repression machine, his military, his imperial expansion. Is it possible to say that the Russian economy is able to produce enough money for Putin's imperialist adventure? I would say without any doubt, yes. It can produce, it had produced it for this for years, and it can do it further. Here we have another question, which is rarely posed, but it's very important, is how the economy should be managed for delivering such a result. And here I would say that maybe it's kind of very unusual statement, but to my mind, the Russian economy would provide Putin with more resources as more liberal it will become. In 2022, the reforms or the measures which were undertaken by the Minister of Finance, by the tax service, by the central bank, by the government in general, were almost all directed on liberalization. It might be listening like a joke, but it was so, on liberalization of the Russian economy. Parallel imports, which blow out dozens of packages of regulation of import, was very useful. It was, some partial tax holidays. There were huge long-term moratorium for bankruptcies, for insolvencies. The banks were allowed not to meet a lot of normative figures, which were mandated by the central bank before, and so fast and more and more and more. So in 2022, the Russian economy actually saved itself. So the entrepreneurs, the businesses, they reconfigured their chains of supply, their productive techniques, their chains of, getting all the necessary materials for their production. And so therefore they saved their businesses, and as they saved their businesses, they saved the Russian economy as well. Of course, the Russian budget was very expanded quite significantly. Putin used or spent a huge part of its reserves, which were accumulated before, but nevertheless, the economy was very much prepared and stimulated to this new military environment, which allowed it to combat with the sanctions. Then, in most recent years, till the end of 2024, everything changed backwards to the state when Kremlin believes that the Russian economy is just something like a servant for the military and the servant for the state machine. We have increased regulations, we have new taxes, we have numerous increase in taxes, redistribution of property, very bad consumer and business sentiments. And so therefore, my most important thesis here is that the Kremlin actually ruins the Russian economy by itself these days. And so not so much the Western sanctions as the Russian economic policies of 2025/2026, they can undermine the Russian economy's capacity to fund the Putin's aggression. But if the Kremlin changes its mind and actually follows the advice of its economic bloc, I think in this case, in financial aspect, yes, they can get as much money. They can get, I would say, the same amount of money they allocated to the military in 2025. It was like 13 trillion rubles, like $200 billion a year. So they can extract this amount of money from the Russian economy almost indefinitely. But here we have, and this thesis, I'm repeating it since 2023. But what has happened new in 2025 and 2026? I would say there are two major, very serious changes happening just now, and we can see them, I think, at least since the start of this year. The first is that the Russian economy, seemingly, here we are now in the, we are entering the realm of where we cannot say anything for sure. It's just like a series of hypotheses, but nevertheless, what we saw in the first 4 or 5 months of 2026, it was very unusual because every year the Russian budget started the year with allocating a lot of money, more than an average month during the year, which was explained by advanced financing of military enterprises. And so if you look on the graphs, showing the expenses of the Russian state budget, you will see that January, February, March, there was very huge expenses, very huge spendings. Then in April, it was a significant drop in spendings, which continued in May. By the end of May and June, the budget turns positive. It produces surplus, and then actually more or less the same picture continues till the end of the year. And if there are additional revenues got by the budget during the year, in November, December, there is another influx of in spending. In 2026, the starting point was a bit different because both in 23, 24, and 25, the budget projections were made in a way that presupposed another increase of military spendings for the next year. The increases were quite serious, ranging between 22 and 31% annually. But in 2025, the economic bloc of the government argued that the Russian economy cannot actually offer more money to the government for waging the war. And under this pressure, the government adopted, and the State Duma adopted, the government elaborated, the State Duma adopted a budget for 2026, which featured the first ever during the war, the first nominal decrease in military spending from 13.5 to 12.9 trillion rubles. What we have seen in the early 2026 is that this budget is not executed. The military, the spendings is growing much faster than last year. It grows around 16%. It is now 16% bigger, the spendings from January to April than last year. Moreover, the spendings in April haven't decreased compared to March, which was unusual for all these years. The spendings in May, the preliminary assessment is also so that they will be even bigger than in April. So there is the same kind of dynamics on the state budget, and it suggests that because we haven't seen any positive developments in any economic sector these days, the government economizes on everything. Transfers to the regional budgets, money which might be allocated, for example, to assisting huge state enterprises like Russian railways, or to help the ailing industries like coal industry. So nothing. 36% of the budget is classified, and the expenses and the spendings are growing and growing and growing. So this suggests to my mind that the military somehow seduced Putin just to increase these spendings almost indefinitely. They got what they want any consecutive months. And even the Russian oil and gas revenues are growing since the start of the war in the Gulf. I would say that this situation looks extremely unstable. Once again, is it manageable? Yes, it is. Can Putin bridge the deficit in the budget? Yes, of course. He can organize, more borrowing on the domestic market, which is full of money. He can devalue the ruble because it is now on the record highs during the time of the war. If ruble devalues, for example, from 71 like it is now to 92, 93, the budget deficit will be halved, definitely. So there are a lot of measures which can be undertaken, but what we see now is an obvious dominance of the military, which actually command Putin or promise, maybe they are promising Putin now just to take the whole Donbass in another 3 weeks or 2 months, I don't know. But anyway, it's seemingly the situation of a kind of a balance which was established before between the economic and siloviki or economic and military branches of the government is now, I would say, over. What does this mean for this year? I really don't know. We should just wait and see what happens. What will happen in March, in May, in June. What the oil prices will be by the mid-year and whatsoever. And this is so the first very important issue. So the Russian economy, once again, even it is the situation is deteriorating, the businesses are very much harmed by the tax increases and excessive regulations, but nevertheless, my point is that it will submit this 12 or 13 trillion rubles to Putin's needs, but I'm very doubtful that it can submit more, like 15, 17, I would not say 20, but it cannot survive smoothly another 30% annual increase of military spending, which seemingly Putin wants once again to display this year. And the second point, very important, is that it seems now that there is another very strong obstacle, very strong problem, very huge problem with the Russian military economy, because for Putin, I'm seriously insisting on this, for Putin, money means everything. So he believes that if he gives someone $1 million, every problem, small, minor problem can be solved. If you give $1 billion, a bigger problem can be solved. If you send 1 trillion rubles to the military, anything can be solved. And he is actually mistaken in this. Because what we see now in Russia is the fact that more and more money is allocated, for example, to hire or to attract people to the army, like, these mercenaries or volunteers, which are very extensively paid now in Russia, both like bonuses for the contracts, both monthly wages and compensations if the people are killed. All these numbers are going up, and the number of new people enrolled in the army is going down. So the government is reluctant to raise this conscription money even more. So here is a very shaky balance. We'll see what happens. But anyway, it's very much obvious that the system starts to work not so, I would say, not so good as it worked in, for example, 2-3 years ago. The second point is that the Russian industry is really unable to meet the ends of the military. So they cannot produce as much armaments, as much ammunition that as the army needs. And for example, technologically, Russia still is very backward, and the gap between the Western technologies and even the Ukrainian technologies and the Russian is widening. And so what we have seen in recent weeks is the increasing number of Ukrainian attacks deep into the Russian territory, which are, I would say, which are changing the mood of the Russian people. For example, if the drones and missiles come to Moscow, or which undermines the Russian economic capacity if the oil refineries and military enterprises are targeted. Anyway, this shows that money doesn't solve all the problems, and this is absolutely new to the entire Putin's entourage, entire Putin's inner circle, because they thought for years that if they have money, they have no problems. Now they have money, and the problems still persist. And so, therefore, I would just, I would not stop. I maybe talk a little bit more, but the major point is that, look, if one asks whether the Russian economy can produce instruments for war, today I would answer yes and no. Yes, in traditional sense of the word. Yes, Russia can survive sanctions. Russia can fund the Putin's special military operation at the amount it funded it last year for many years ahead, for many years in the future. But there are definitely new factors. First of all, the factor that the military wants more and more and more money, and the military doesn't act economically. This is also very important to understand, because in every country, in every economy, when someone thinks economically and looks on his business as an economic business, as a business or an activity which is somehow regulated by economic rationality, in this case, the Russian military for years should learn many lessons taught by the new economic environment in Russia. Because, for example, yes, during the Second World War, just a very small example, during the Second World War, the money which was paid to the Soviet soldiers fighting against the German army was around 6.3% of all military expenditures of the Soviet Union. Now, the money which is disbursed among the Russian soldiers fighting with the Ukrainian army is around 32% of the military financial allocation. So it's 5 times more than the time. So the payments to the military are very huge. They are they are on the highest level during the whole military history of the Russian Federation, Soviet Union, and the Russian Empire combined. I mean the most of the military personnel. I don't talk about the officers who during the Russian Empire were paid very well, but as the private members, the privates, the surgeons are concerned, this is the days when they are paid the highest wages ever. But what is striking to me, that the military commanders don't count this at all. So they don't adjust their actions, their orders, considering the value of their soldiers. The soldiers are very expensive, but they are killed in the useless attacks, as they were killed in the same useless attacks, in 1945, when Marshal Zhukov wanted to get Berlin capitulation by the 1st of May, the proletarian holiday. So this is a very strange element. Moreover, the Minister of Defense is now a professional economist, and nothing has changed in that. The situation really is absolutely the same. So the Russian military system is irreparable. It bears the worst elements of Imperial and Soviet army in terms of its effectiveness. So therefore, I would say that the final defeat and the final failure of the Russian forces in Ukraine is almost obvious from my point of view. The war has changed its direction. This winter, the Ukrainians, they started to reconquer, liberating the territories which were previously occupied by the Russians. And if you look on the history of the warfare in the last 150 years, you will see that a war which started as a blitzkrieg and turned into the war of attrition was never won by the aggressor. Never. So if you are stalled, you never get the second breeze. You never get the second chance, to for a huge and massive assault and offensive. So this is my point, that I would say since early 2025, I said many times that Putin should seek peace on different conditions, maybe better, maybe worse. He will, even now, he can sell to his intelligent and nice Russian people that he won this war, and everybody will be happy if the war stops. Economy will do much better if the war stops. We can discuss these matters, but there are no, unsolvable problems which can appear if the economy will turn back from the war economy into a peaceful one. It's when one says that this would be the worst thing which can happen to the Russian economy, I would deeply disagree. Economy would embrace peace with big pleasure and good results. But nevertheless, Putin doesn't want to stop. No one understands what he really wants to achieve these days, because his final aims and final tasks are as I would say as mysterious as ever, as they were before the war. And so this is why. So once again, economy is his. Even now, the economy is his most reliable element of his system. But all the other systems, all the other elements are becoming less and less reliable. And most of all, his own strategy, whom no one knows, and maybe he also do not understand. So this is what I can comment if we look on the Russian economic and military situation just these days.
Okay, thank you. And I will ask just one question. It's going to be a little long one, and then I'm going to pass on to you to Q&A. So to a layman, just like myself, Russian economy still seems resilient. It seems that it's working, and money gets exchanged. There is parallel import and things like that. And you mentioned that if Putin or his cabinet, however it works there, listens to his financial bloc, he might get financing indefinitely for the war. So what does mean indefinitely? Is it indefinitely meaning for 10 years, 3 months? I mean, indefinitely is a very broad term. So how would that happen? What would be the advice of that financial bloc to him? You might have touched on it, but maybe elaborate a little bit more. And what could be the final breaking point where the system would collapse? Not the system, the economy. We're talking about economy, where the situation would go so badly that it's unsustainable.
So, what do I mean when I think that when I say that the economy can run almost indefinitely? For example, I'm not on the economic block of Putin. I don't even have direct access to these people. But for example, just look on the way Putin should change his mind about the difference between business, economy, and budget. Because for him these days, is that if something which is my money is what is inside the budget, what is paid into the budget, which I can spend. And he doesn't believe and he doesn't understand that the money which is maybe not paid into the budget as taxes, but which is working in the economy is even more useful. For example, you can get more taxes, you can get this money into the budget, and then you will pay it to the people who are losing their jobs, or you can just leave these people to continue their small businesses. They will feed themselves. They will even pay you a little more taxes, but they will not ask you for being paid as unemployment benefits or something like this. He seemingly doesn't understand this at all. For example, he wants to combat inflation. A lot of Russian goods which are sold in the Russian shops comes from abroad. It's around 25% of food stuff which is on the Russian in the Russian food stores, and even more like 30% of all durable goods and non-food consumer goods. So what do you want? Should you do for combating inflation? You should lower the prices of imported goods. What has been done since 2022? When the parallel imports came into being, the businesses started to import the goods, I would say not illegally, but semi-illegally. So they are paying some custom duties, but they are taking these goods into Kazakhstan, for example, paying some tariff, which is the Kazakh tariff. It goes even to the Russian budget, but it's lower than the Russian tariff. And then they ship these goods from through Kazakhstan-Russian border and sell it in the Russian shops, because Kazakhstan belongs to the Eurasian Economic Union and to the customs zone. Everyone was happy. The infrastructure was booming. The logistics facilities and storages in Kazakhstan were, built like mushrooms, as we say, after the big rainfall. But of course, Putin wants to get more custom duties paid into the budget, and so he imposes actually a new customs on the Kazakhstan-Russian border, and started just 2 months ago. And they started complete checking of all the trucks there, and of course, half of them just stopped. So there is increasing deficit of goods on the Russian market just because he wants to get more money into the budget, but it decreases the real revenues and real incomes of the people, and it makes the goods more expensive. So here he doesn't see an economy like a huge self-governing and self-balancing organism. He just see the budget and nothing except the budget. For example, the very good example, he introduced a special tourist tax in 2025. Before, it was some kind of voluntarily fee which the hotels in the tourist regions may actually apply to the rates the tourists pay. Now, from 2025, it was a tourist tax introduced by the central government. Now, even the State Duma, after it analyzed the results of the first year of this taxation, they find it out that it was the amount of tax collected into the budget was 11% less than the cost of administrating the tax. This is what Putin thinks about economy and how he tries to regulate it. And this is everywhere. They increase so-called utilization fee for new automobiles, for new vehicles, passenger cars, to a level which in around 30% of passenger cars which are now sold in Russia, they applied to them utilization fee, which is a quasi-tax instrument, a fee which exceeds the wholesale price of the car. So it doubles the retail price. Yes, they planned to get 80% more of this tax in 2025. What was the result? Plus 4%. And the amount of cars sold was down by 16%. So they are ruining the economy in the name of the budget. And this is actually absolutely counterproductive. But this is how Putin sees the world and the economy. He cannot see it in another way. And his aide, Mr. Oreshkin, just 2 weeks ago said very proudly that we will use the artificial intelligence and the new technological developments to rebuild, it's not a mistake, a planned economy. This is what they want to do. and the results would be even worse. So just let Putin do what he wants. Ukraine will win. It's not about the Western sanctions. He is ruining. He is committed economic suicide. What he is doing since mid 2025, and for me, it's unexplainable because it's not about the lessons of history which he should learn. He presided over two periods in Russian economic history, which the first one was in early 2000s, from 2000 to 2004, when Putin himself promoted liberalization and he lowered the taxes, he liberalized the economy, he actually promoted entrepreneurship, and the Russian budget revenues exploded. The Russian economy was growing by 7% annually from 2000 to 2007. For 8 years, the average growth rate of GDP was 7.4%. At the same time, I would say inflation. Can you guess what the inflation was at the time on average? Annual inflation. 13.6. 13.6% annually, and the economy was booming. Now, inflation is around 8%, and then they are third year in a row they're fighting inflation. What for? Maybe you should, somehow increase the business confidence as a major element of your economic policy. No, business confidence doesn't matter. Only inflation does. Why? I can't explain. The second situation was in 2022, when once again liberalization of economic activity produced economic growth in 2023, 2024, and gave him a lot of money for his military enterprises. And now, once again, he does absolutely opposite. Why? It's not for me.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Don't press button on the microphone because people are checking if it's working and then they're turning off. It's fine.
Okay. I have 3 questions. My first question, Vladislav, you're always amusing me. You're telling how Russia can sustain indefinitely the current war and the current situation, and then you are starting as a true opposition person explaining how things are bad. So what is real? If things are so bad, but it can continue indefinitely, maybe things are not so bad, or it's not truly bad.
Okay.
And maybe the West, Ukraine, we as the opposition community can do something to use this bad to our benefit, so that it would not continue indefinitely. So what would you say about this? That's the first one. The second one is about the situation in the elites. At the end of the day, economy is all about psychology, right? So about people's expectations. And we saw 1 year ago, I personally was witnessing the phenomena when Russian economic elites, and in general, all our big bosses, they tend to be upbeat and say like everything is fine because they don't want in front of the very big boss to be people who are not doing their job right. But approximately 1 year ago, many of people from the economic bloc, they were actually be very alarmist and were saying this is bad, that is bad. Then they shut up. Now it's another way from political bloc, and Boni is speaking, and like some other people are speaking, Ribislo speaking up also, like everything is bad, split in the elites, but the situation is about to collapse. So where you think again the reality is and what is behind this? And the third question is about future. Let's imagine that tomorrow the war ends. We saw this I don't know how to properly translate it into English. You introduced this deathonomics situation when everything was growing. Then this growth somehow stalled. But if tomorrow things would end, doesn't mean the collapse, doesn't mean the new growth. People returning back home and these payments that would stop coming to them doesn't mean the internal demand would shrink or the other way around. So how you see the situation after the war ends?
I will try to be. I will try to be brief. So the first question was how you can combine good and bad immediately, and how. Dialectics. Either the situation will stay indefinitely or it can be changed. My point is very clear, and it has been this way for around 3 years so far. My point is that Russia cannot be defeated economically, but can be defeated militarily. So, and I just reiterate, and what we see these days is just a kind of proof of it. So, economically, to have a popular resistance because of high inflation, the riots in the big Russian cities because of the internet disruptions, no. Collapse of on the front line, massive attacks on the Russian infrastructure, missiles attacks on Moscow, yes, this can happen. So once again, from the first days of the war, I was a huge advocate of, look, you can trade with Russia, you can buy Russian gas very cheap, but you should give Ukraine more money and weapons. It would be more damageable for Putin. Strong and militarily strong Ukraine is more dangerous for Putin than the oil embargo in Europe. Much more dangerous. And all these years, the Western politicians said that now we see that we can undermine the Russian system by economic sanctions. I would say no, you cannot. But the Ukrainians can crush the Russian army, and they are closer and closer to this. While the sanctions are not so much effective, I would reiterate it many times. The second question was about the elites. Look, this is a good and very interesting point.
Vlad, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the question was like, what is it something that can be done on behalf of the West?
Sorry?
Or is something that can be done on behalf of the West? Because even in terms of weapons right now, like 90% of kills in the front line by Ukrainians is with Ukrainian own weapons.
Yes, of course. So no, I understand. So from the West, if the West cannot supply more weapons, maybe it can supply more money for encouraging for developing the Ukrainian military industry. I don't know. I'm not a military specialist, but I see it's very clear that economic pressure is much less effective than the military pressure, and it produces less problems in Russia and in the Russian elites and the Russian people, of course, than the Ukrainian military success. So what is about the elites? I would say in this way, look, yes, there is no conflict in the elites, meaning that they wanted, either to stop the war or to continue the war, or they want Putin to stay in power, or they want Putin to leave. It's not a conflict that may bring Putin down. There are a lot of, I would say, discontent inside the elite, because the elites understand very well that everything is going in a wrong way. So the pressure on the business is increasing, the social stability is decreasing, the military successes doesn't exist in the front line, the money is going fast, and actually economy deteriorates in one or another way. And so my feeling is that the elite, even Bonya, if you want to include it there, all they appeal to Putin to do what to their mind would be the best solution. So the economic bloc appeals, to limit the military expenditures, to economize on the army, maybe not to stop the war, but to make the military more effective, to introduce some, liberal reforms and whatsoever. The military They want, to increase taxes to get more money, promising that they will be victorious almost the next day. So this is a struggle for influencing Putin, not the struggle for deposing him. This is my feeling. And so they understand, most of them understand, that if the regime collapses, everyone would lose. So therefore, they are not interested in changing the regime. They are mostly interested in keeping it stable, and they all understand that current Putin policy destabilizes it. So it's a kind of self-preservation. First of all, the idea of the elites, is self-preservation. And the last point is about what would happen the next day after the war ends. Once again, look, there is no such thing as a bad or good economy, weak or I would say solid or disrupted society. It's everything about management. So, for example, we'll imagine tomorrow war ends. Putin agrees with President Trump to freeze the conflict on the current lines. President Zelensky signs the armistice. Okay, it's stopped, and if the war stops, to my mind, it would be close to impossible to start it once again. In, for example, two years later. But so what may happen? If this happens, there are two alternatives. First alternative is saying yes, the war is over. All 800,000 people who were fighting on the front line go home with no pensions, nothing else. We don't care. You are great. You are heroes. So you are free. This is one situation. Another situation is like, look, NATO countries, the corrupted West is our enemy. We should be prepared. So 500,000 people who are serving, you are our heroes. Here are the special military settlements. You will stay there. You will get the same amount of money paid every month, just for staying there, like the Soviet army stayed in its military settlements. You will just be paid for 2 more years. Then we will see. Wait and see. 2 years, you are getting your 200,000 rubles per month. If you look on the amount of money spent on the Russian military personnel, you will see that the monthly payments to the soldiers and the officers account approximately for 45% of all the payments to the personnel. Another 55% is either the bonuses for new contracts or the compensation for being wounded or killed. If you take this out, you economize around 2 trillion rubles immediately. If you stop the military logistics, every day continuing the war, you economize another around 2 trillion. And so you more or less, you will have the Russian budget balanced immediately if the war stops. So this is a very important point. The second point is that, look, in 2025, the Russian fixed investment fell for the first time since the start of the war by like 2.3%. This year it will fall once again. Why? Because the businesses are very uncertain about the future. Look on the Russian, for example, Moscow Stock Exchange. Every time when there is a slight element that Trump says that we will revive the encouraged spirit, or Putin says that we promote 3 days armistice with Ukraine during the Victory Day, and whatsoever, the stock market indexes are going up quite significantly in some cases. So the Russian investors are staying on the sidelines, waiting to jump in. And I spoke with many big Russian businesses and big Russian bankers and said, look, we have a lot of money, free money, which can be invested, but we are not even making loans to any enterprise except of our banking, financial, industrial groups, because we are absolutely uncertain about any investment perspectives. So my suggestion is that if the war stops, if the army is manageably dissolved, 300,000 people, elderly and wounded, are sent home with decent pensions, or other are kept securely in some kind of military installations, a little bit, a little decrease is in military production, economizing on death gratuities and everyday logistics. In this case, I would project like 5-6% growth for 2-3 years at least. So I don't feel the problem of economic risks. It's not the Soviet economy when everything was. No, the Soviet economy was very much dependent on military-industrial complex. It was like 19% of GDP compared to around 5.5 these days. And the second point is actually that the Soviet economy was a planned economy of shortages. Now, Russia is more or less, and as we have seen even during the war years, is a market economy. So the market economy revives much faster from the times of problems if you have, at least small elements of liberalization and more money in the system. Both points can be achieved. So therefore, I do not see much risks in stopping the war. Maybe the military and the Siloviki in Russia, this aggressive part of the Putin's elite, tells Putin something different, maybe. But actually, I don't see many risks in stopping the war.
May last one in
Okay.
in continuation of the last question and your answer. Just if we look into the problem, the sign-up bonuses that and you correctly said like more than half of the money that has been paid to the army is either sign-up bonus or kill down bonus.
Yeah.
So sign up. It's going to the banks because most usual behavior of a person who's signing up in the army, he is overflooded with this microcredits. He is paying too much on the interest. So he's signing up because he wants to repay his debt. He's signing up, this money is gone. And either, even if it is not going to the banks, it's going into consumption immediately because it stays with the family. So sign-up bonus immediately goes in the financial system. And if it's out, it's out of financial system. Then these coffin payments, in case of death, they are going mainly in the real estate market because that's what the families are using them for, to buy an apartment for other kids, brothers, sisters, whatever relatives. This is a lump sum that comes, so it's very convenient to use it as a down payment or any other kind of again, you are taking it out, you significantly impacting a very important segment of the economy, which is already struggling because this privileged mortgage system was downsized by the central bank recently. So you are kind of dismissing it, you are approaching it from just a fiscal point of view. And yeah, I agree. It's like by this, I mean, they're slashing by half your expenditure, but at the same time, you're actually taking out from the economy very significant source of cash. It's one of the reasons for the inflation, this payments, right? It's why the inflation is so high, is exactly because of this 50%.
Look, that's true, but there are two important elements. So if we come back to the absolute numbers, to the relative numbers, you will see that all the payments, including death gratuities, are now around 4.2 trillion rubles per year. So if we slash it by half, it would be like 2 trillions coming out of the system, and not channeled into this consumption. This is roughly 1% of Russian GDP. How important this would be, we will see. Yeah, but anyway, 1%, I wouldn't say it changes the situation completely. This is one point of one element. The second element, which is also very important, is that actually most of this money goes to different underdeveloped and remote regions where the most part of the new recruits are coming from. So therefore, I wouldn't say that this may affect seriously, either Moscow and St. Petersburg, like as two center of economic activity, or the Urals, the territories which are deeply engaged in military production. So there, they have another sources of revenue. So once again, I do not dismiss this argument. It's absolutely true. It's significant sum of money which supports the development of remote regions in Russia all these years. That's true, absolutely. How much it will, how significant it would be for the economy, whether it can be, compensated by the growth of investment by the banks, by other industrial groups, no one knows. But nevertheless, the problem is, to my mind, that the businesses, they are very much depressed by what is going on. And yes, it's difficult to say what will be the bigger factor, the business confidence growth or the absence of this money. But we'll see. Once again, I cannot believe that the peace dividend can be less than the war dividends. Moreover, the last point would be even more important, because the war, the increase in military financing was significantly fueled by the Russian reserves, which are now depleted. So actually now now the government cannot spend anything except something which it will be taken as as a loan from the population. So therefore, now it looks as it comes to some kind of of a natural stop of this policy. We'll see.
Yeah, there is currently quite a big discussion about savings in deposited in the banks. So I'm not quite getting what's the point of this discussion, because as I understand, money government already forced banks into investing money in military manufacturing bonds. So basically, money are already gone. And what's the point of this discussion right now? And why do they try to figure out the way to freeze the savings? And why don't they just start printing more money and go into hyperinflation that seems to be like less painful way than telling people directly that their money are gone?
Look, the money haven't gone. So there is, of course, the trend towards trying, what, to introduce something like a forced loans via the banks. So what we have seen, for example, last year, we have seen that the Minister of Finance succeeded in placing almost 2 trillion rubles in government bonds in one day, in November 2025, which was absolutely an absolute record, historical record. Of course, this money, the banks formally bought these government bonds. The next day, or even the same day, they put it in the central bank as a collateral and get money from the central bank. It's like a printing, but this is still manageable and limited. For example, now we would see that the increase of this central bank operation is around 4 trillion rubles compared with the start of the war. So yes, they printed 4 trillion rubles. They printed even more when the state wealth fund, this government reserve fund, part of its money was arrested by the European authorities in Brussels in 2022. But later, in 2022 and in 2023, this money was actually on the books. It was sold to the central bank, and the central bank printed rubles. So it gets this money in euros onto its balance sheet from the Ministry of Finance and gives rubles to the Ministry of Finance. It's another point, another element of emission. So, but anyway, to confiscate the people's money, or to freeze them, or to make the forced loans is, I would say, out of the question, because this Putin's logic is just to continue special military operation, not to change it into full-scale war in Russia's eyes. And if you make a forced loans or this bonds which will be which will yield in 35 years with low percentage rate and whatsoever, this revokes the sentiment of we are at real war, and the government doesn't even pretend we are in a kind of a normality. And this would be a huge blow to the people. So therefore, I would say that they will invent some new measures not to get this money, which are numerous, actually, I would say. And the state debt is not so big. I reiterated many times that in the times of war, you can increase the state debt and then repay it or devalue it. Whatever would be easier. But anyway, this is the debate about the confiscation of the money or the freezing is, I think, a very speculative debate which has no much ground under it. Okay.
I think he might have taken my question, but I'm not sure if when you say freezing of the money, I heard that they would give an IOU and not allow people to access their dollar accounts.
There are no dollar accounts anymore because actually, look, the problem is before the war, the dollar accounts were, I would say, they accounted for maybe from 15 to 17% of all the assets of the Russian people in the banks. Now they are less than 4%. So the economy is really de-dollarized because actually, look, there were different pushes for this because the dollar were eventually outlawed in 2022 when it became very risky to have dollars in bank accounts, which was, you cannot use it, you can only exchange it into rubles and then to take them back from their accounts. And later, you see that the dollar is losing its value against the Russian ruble, and the deposit rates on the ruble were very high. So the Russian people, even some ones who already went abroad and have their dollar accounts abroad, like in Armenia, Georgia, Cyprus, they took it back, exchanged into rubles, for example, in late 2022, by the exchange rate of 105, and push them into the ruble deposit for 20%. And 2 years later, they have 140 rubles in their account on every 100, and the exchange rate is 70. So this is why the problem of closing access to the dollar account is really very much important. So if there is a kind of freeze, it should be applied only to the ruble accounts because they are the absolute majority of the funds the people have in the banks. They may have a lot of dollars in cash, yeah, but in the banks it's mostly non-existent.
So this IOU would apply to the ruble account?
Maybe, but once again, I'm not sure. I would say that if the government wants to get this money from people, it doesn't need a lot of money. For example, the budget deficit is around 5 trillion rubles last year. Maybe it would be a little bit more this year. The amount of money on the bank accounts of the people, private bank accounts, is 76 trillion rubles. So it's 15 times the annual budget deficit. 15 times, 1/5. So you just need 5% of all this money mass to get. Your problem is solved for 1 year. So just propose, for example, the ordinary people some kind of paper bonds yielding 17%, and with a nominal value of 5,000 rubles, which every pensioner can buy, and you will have huge queues in Sberbank, and it would be bought out in 1 day. So they're different. You will pay a little bit more, but no one knows what would be the exchange rate in 1 year, what would be the inflation rate. So just be a little bit more inventive, innovative, risky, and you can manage this. But I agree that they can choose the worst scenario and the worst solution. That's
Yeah, because the economy is all based on psychology, as we mentioned.
Definitely,
So,
definitely.
right.
And they should actually look on this and take it into account.
Okay, that was a quick question.
Very quick. Much quicker. So you said that Russia cannot be defeated economically, but can be defeated militaristically. At the same time, so we understand that Western countries can supply Ukraine with funds, with weapons, etc. But they cannot supply them most likely by human power. And I guess the major factor here would be that Ukraine is getting to the shortage of human power, of people. And for me, it looks like the militaristic defeat of Russia is unlikely possible. How would you comment this?
Good point. Several of my friends in Ukraine are mentioning this as well. That the tensions inside the Ukrainian society because of the forced mobilization is growing. That of course most of the Ukrainian immigrants who fled to Europe cannot be returned. And that Russia has bigger pool of soldiers. It is, yes, that's true. But here, I would say, once again, Russia, the problem with the soldiers is really very huge psychological problem for Russians. So the Russians can, my idea of desonomics is that the Russians can tolerate this war till the people who are killed there choose this fate voluntarily. They are very much paid. They decided to go there. They are killed. It's their personal choice. No one cares. If Putin wants to get 500,000 more people mobilized and taking them for the streets, this I'm very doubtful that the system can survive this. So the repeating of Ukrainian, Bussification in Moscow is very unlikely. So this is not for what Putin prepared Russians for 5 years. Zelensky said from the very first days, I'm here, I would not flee, everyone should go to the front line, we have total mobilization. The rhetoric in the Ukrainian society is very much that we are fighting the existential threat and the Russian aggression. The rhetoric of the Russian society is we are living the ordinary life, everyday life, as ever, as before, but we are waging special military operation. To change this special military operation in the full-scale war would be a disaster for Putin. No one will tolerate this kind of change these days because it might be tolerated in 2022 when it was the Ukrainian offense. The war was just 5 months in, it was just huge agitation. Putin was very popular because he confronted the West and the aggressive NATO bloc and blah blah blah. Now, after 4 years of this war of attrition, either you should win or you should somehow, don't disturb us. If you want to disturb the society, I think would be his end.
Okay, thank you. And on this somewhat positive note, we're going to end. Thank you very much. Guys, again, don't forget to donate. There's a QR code right there. And thank you for coming. And thank you to our guest.